Hello everyone, and welcome. Today, we delve into Elaine Showalter's groundbreaking essay, Toward a Feminist Poetics, a seminal work that revolutionized feminist literary theory in the late 20th century. Showalter challenges the traditional male-centric models of literary criticism and proposes a new framework for analyzing women's writing. She introduces the concept of gynocriticism, a critical practice that focuses on women as writers, exploring their history, styles, themes, and the evolution of a distinct female literary tradition. Through this, Showalter urges us to move beyond merely reacting to male narratives and instead to construct an autonomous space for female creativity and critical discourse. Join me as we explore how, Toward a Feminist Poetics, redefined the landscape of literary criticism and paved the way for a richer, more inclusive understanding of literature. Elaine Showalter's Toward a Feminist Poetics is a seminal and groundbreaking essay in feminist literary criticism. Initially delivered as an introductory lecture for the first series on literature and women at the University of Oxford in 1978, the essay was subsequently published in 1979. This influential work delves into the intersection of feminist literary theory and criticism with conventional literary theories, critically examining their relationship. In this, Showalter first introduces and defines the term gynocriticism. This concept represents a significant contribution to feminist literary scholarship, as it emphasizes the importance of exploring literature through the lens of female experiences, perspectives, and authorship. In the opening of Toward a Feminist Poetics, Elaine Showalter critiques the landscape of literary criticism in the 1970s, particularly within the context of English studies. She notes that prominent works in the field, such as contemporary approaches to English studies, were predominantly authored by men like George Steiner, Raymond Williams, Christopher Butler, Jonathan Culler, Terry Eagleton, and Leon Adale, the biographer of Henry James. This observation sets the stage for her discussion on the marginalization and misunderstanding of feminist criticism during this period. Showalter underscores that feminist criticism faced considerable opposition within English departments, being perceived as an outsider and often dismissed without a fair evaluation. Many established critics approached feminist criticism with preconceived notions and stereotypes, contributing to its isolation within academic circles. She provides examples to illustrate this point, such as Robert Partlow's dismissal of feminist criticism as women's lib propaganda masquerading as literary criticism, and Robert Boyce's article, A Case Against Feminist Criticism, published in the winter 1977 issue of Partisan Review. Boyce's argument centered on the fear that feminist criticism would seek to dismantle the reputation of great male artists. This perception, as Showalter notes, was based on a narrow reading of Joan Mellon's work, Women and Their Sexuality in the New Film, showcasing a fundamental misunderstanding of feminist criticism's goals and methodologies. Showalter suggests that feminist criticism's vulnerability to such prejudiced attacks stems from a lack of a clearly defined theoretical framework. She argues that even feminist critics themselves often struggle to articulate the principles underlying their work, which leaves them susceptible to misinterpretation and misrepresentation by their detractors. This lack of a cohesive theory, she suggests, contributes to the challenges feminist criticism faces in gaining acceptance and recognition within the broader academic community. Feminist critical practice faces another significant challenge, the suspicion of theory within feminist activism. This suspicion stems from the prevailing sexism exhibited by prominent theorists such as Harold Bloom, Robert Boyce, and Norman Mailer. Feminists find it challenging to embrace inherently patriarchal theories, as they often perpetuate male-centric perspectives and experiences as universal. During the 1970s, most literary quarterlies focused predominantly on male experiences and perceptions, considering them to represent a universal human condition. This entrenched bias further reinforces the suspicion of theory among feminist activists and theorists, contributing to their increased isolation within academic circles. Mary Daly, in her influential work Beyond God the Father, Towards a Philosophy of Women's Liberation, critiques the limitations of traditional theories, particularly the God method, which she identifies as serving social and cultural institutions dedicated to maintaining the status quo. This method, Daly argues, has systematically silenced women's voices and suppressed their capacity to articulate their own experiences and perspectives. For feminists, therefore, the academic demand for rigorous theoretical allegiance can be perceived as a profound threat to their quest for authenticity. The expectation to conform to theoretical paradigms that do not genuinely reflect women's lived realities further marginalizes feminist criticism, impeding its acceptance and legitimacy within the broader academic and critical landscape. In the context of the United States, there exists a notable resistance among certain feminists to the incorporation of feminist critical theory into the academic mainstream. This resistance is grounded in the conviction that the activism and empirical foundations of feminist criticism constitute its greatest strengths. There is an apprehension that, should feminist critical theory become fully assimilated into academic structures and perfected as a formal discipline, the feminist movement itself might be rendered sterile, losing its vitality, immediacy, and transformative potential. Elaine Showalter contends that this resistance arises, in part, from a rationalization of the psychic barriers women have historically encountered owing to their exclusion from theoretical discourse. For centuries, women were relegated to subordinate and ancillary roles within literary scholarship, whilst men occupied the dominant positions of authority. Male critics frequently established influential schools of thought, considering themselves as integral to the literary canon as the authors they interpreted. By contrast, women were largely confined to roles such as translators, interpreters, hostesses and editors, their intellectual contributions marginalized or rendered invisible. In Toward a Feminist Poetics, Showalter seeks to confront and remedy this systemic imbalance. She proposes a brief classification of feminist criticism, positioning it not merely as a reactionary movement but as a profound and necessary contribution to English studies. Her aim is to facilitate the reconstruction of women's political, social and cultural experiences within literary discourse, thereby affirming feminist criticism as a legitimate and indispensable academic pursuit, one capable of fundamentally reshaping the landscape of literary scholarship and criticism. In Toward a Feminist Poetics, Elaine Showalter articulates two primary categories of feminist literary criticism: the woman as reader and the woman as writer. The woman as reader, or what Showalter terms feminist critique, involves women engaging with literature predominantly authored by men. This critical approach transforms the interpretation of literary works by foregrounding the importance of their sexual codes. Feminist critique, akin to other critical methodologies, is rooted in historical inquiry and aims to expose the ideological structures embedded within texts. It specifically examines the depiction of women through stereotypes, the marginalization and misrepresentation of women within literary criticism, the lacuna inherent in male-constructed literary theories, the manipulation and exploitation of female audiences in film and popular culture, and the positioning of women as signs within semiotic frameworks. Conversely, the woman as writer, or gynocriticism, concerns itself with women as producers of literary texts and meanings, charting the development of their histories, themes, genres and literary structures. Gynocriticism investigates the psychodynamics of female creativity, the linguistics and complexities of a distinctively female language, the trajectories of individual and collective female literary careers, and offers detailed literary histories and close studies of women writers and their works. Showalter introduces the term la gynocritique or gynocritics to encapsulate this mode of criticism, a form that had, until her intervention, remained without a precise designation. The fundamental distinction between feminist critique and gynocriticism lies in their orientation and methodology. Feminist critique is politically engaged and theoretically aligned with Marxism and aesthetic theories, seeking to uncover systemic inequities and biases. Gynocriticism, by contrast, is more experimental and internally coherent, resonating closely with the broader spectrum of feminist theory and research practices. Carolyn Heilbrunn and Catherine Stimson aptly draw an analogy wherein feminist critique represents the Old Testament, concerned with the identification of past transgressions and errors, while gynocriticism symbolizes the New Testament, aspiring towards imaginative reconstruction and the envisioning of new literary possibilities. Showalter asserts that both feminist critique and gynocriticism are indispensable to the formation of a complete and dynamic feminist literary vision. Elaine Showalter's feminist critique of Thomas Hardy's novel The Mayor of Casterbridge demonstrates the ways in which male critics, such as Irving Howe, can interpret and thereby distort literary texts through a predominantly male-centric lens. Howe's admiration for the novel's opening episode, where Michael Henchard drunkenly sells his wife and daughter, exemplifies a male fantasy that disregards the profound ethical and emotional implications of the act. Showalter argues that a female reader would respond quite differently, as women are not culturally or ideologically conditioned to identify with male values and perspectives. Showalter draws attention to the character of Susan Henchard, whose passive existence within the novel highlights the limitations imposed upon her by her gender and her resultant lack of agency over her own life. Michael Henchard's tragedy, she contends, is rooted not merely in personal downfall but in his painful recognition of the inadequacies of the male community's values and his consequent failure to reclaim the love and warmth he so desperately seeks. The true emotional nucleus of the novel, according to Showalter, lies in Henchard's relationship with his daughter, Elizabeth Jane, and his eventual humiliation and acknowledgement of the resilience, dignity, and strength embodied by women. Hardy's depiction of female characters, including Elizabeth Jane, can be interpreted as idealized projections of a repressed male self, offering a counterpoint to the destructive forces of patriarchal ambition and pride. Through this feminist critique, Showalter challenges prevailing male-oriented interpretations of literary texts, underscoring the necessity of understanding women's experiences beyond simplistic stereotypes and portrayals of victimhood. She advocates for a broader and more inclusive literary analysis that incorporates the insights of female theorists and applies feminist theoretical frameworks even to canonical male-authored texts and films. In doing so, she seeks to transcend historical and ideological limitations, thereby reconstituting literary criticism to be more representative of diverse human experiences. Gynocriticism stands in marked contrast to the prevailing preoccupation, whether affirmative or critical, with male literature. It seeks to establish a female-centered framework for the analysis of women's writing, advocating for the development of new models derived from female experiences, while simultaneously discarding the restrictive paradigms of male-authored theories. Rather than attempting to assimilate women into the existing male literary tradition, gynocriticism focuses on the exploration of a distinct female cultural sphere. It represents an epistemological and methodological shift, seeking to chart a literary territory that is autonomous, rooted in the realities and consciousness of women themselves. Elaine Showalter positions gynocriticism as intimately connected to feminist research in fields such as history, anthropology, psychology, and sociology. This interdisciplinary approach supports the hypothesis of a female subculture, encompassing more than just the ascribed social status of women or the internalized constructs of femininity. It also embraces the lived occupations, interactions, and collective consciousness of women across different societies and historical periods. Michelle Z. Rosaldo, in her theoretical overview Woman, Culture and Society, articulates a pivotal insight relevant to this discourse. She asserts that the very symbolic and societal frameworks that differentiate and ostensibly circumscribe women's activities can serve as sources of solidarity and value among women. In literature, feminine values and solidarities poses the potential to subvert and permeate the masculine structures that endeavor to restrict them. Throughout history, women writers have appropriated myths such as that of the Amazon and have depicted secluded female societies, from Victorian narratives to contemporary science fiction, as a means of asserting female agency, resistance, and collective identity. Thus, gynocriticism not only recovers the female voice within the literary tradition but also fosters the creation of a literary culture that celebrates the complexity, autonomy, and richness of women's experiences.
Elaine Showalter identifies several pioneering works by young American feminist scholars that significantly broaden the understanding of American women's culture in the 19th century, particularly through the lens of their literary output. These critics provide profound insights into the ways women experienced, expressed, and navigated their worlds during this period. The Female World of Love and Ritual by Carol Smith Rosenberg examines the homosocial and emotionally charged realm of 19th century women, using a wealth of letters exchanged between women as primary sources. Smith Rosenberg's work reveals how emotional connections between women in this era were shaped by both personal affection and societal constraints. Nancy Cott's The Bonds of Womanhood, Woman's Sphere in New England, 1780 to 1835, investigates the themes of sisterly solidarity, loyalty, and shared experiences that emerged among women in New England during the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Cott argues that these bonds, although rooted in a history of submission and suffering, also represented a crucial form of cultural and emotional resistance. Through these networks of women, Cott traces the origins of a complex, shared experience of womanhood, which was both shaped by and responsive to the dominant patriarchal structures of the time. In The Feminization of American Culture, Anne Douglas explores the influence of sentimental literature produced by women and clergymen, groups that had been disempowered in the post-industrial era. Douglas contends that this sentimental literature played a critical role in shaping the mass culture of America, providing a foundation for the modern understanding of femininity and the culture it spawned. By examining the intersection of gender and culture, she highlights the formative role women played in shaping the aesthetic and moral dimensions of American society. Nina Auerbach's Communities of Women, An Idea in Fiction, explores how female bonds are depicted in literature, ranging from the matriarchal households in the works of Louisa May Alcott and Elizabeth Gaskell, to the educational settings in the novels of Dorothy Sayers, Sylvia Plath, and Muriel Spark. Auerbach emphasizes the significance of these female-centered spaces in literature, showing how women's solidarity, both within familial and institutional contexts, plays a vital role in the formation of female identity. Her work is considered crucial in understanding the diverse representations of women in English literature, offering rich insights into the cultural dynamics that shaped and were shaped by women's writing. Auerbach also notes the vast trove of undiscovered manuscripts, urging further scholarly attention to unearth these hidden narratives that provide essential historical and literary perspectives on women's lives. These critics collectively embody the thrust of gynocriticism, not merely as an academic exercise but as a crucial endeavor to understand and elevate the literary contributions of women, giving voice to experiences long ignored or misunderstood by mainstream literary scholarship. Elaine Showalter emphasizes the need for gynocriticism to consider the broader political, social and personal histories that shape women's literary choices and careers. This approach is pivotal in understanding how the experiences of women writers are intertwined with their social and cultural contexts, which often extend far beyond the realm of their artistic work. Virginia Woolf, in her essay Women and Fiction, 1929, similarly advocates for a flexible approach to examining women writers. Woolf stresses that a narrow focus on the work itself fails to account for the conditions under which women write. Women's literary production, she asserts, has historically been influenced by circumstances and constraints unrelated to art, such as societal expectations and gendered limitations. By acknowledging these external influences, gynocriticism can offer a more nuanced and comprehensive understanding of women's literature and the contexts in which it was created. Showalter illustrates this point by discussing Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Aurora Leigh, a key text in feminist literary studies. In the novel's introduction, Cora Kaplan defines Barrett Browning's feminism as romantic and bourgeois, grounded in the transformative powers of art, love, and Christian charity. However, Kaplan overlooks a crucial influence on Barrett Browning's work during the 1850s, Robert Browning, her husband. Showalter highlights the significance of this male poet, suggesting that his impact on Barrett Browning's writing was profound, especially given the male-dominated literary tradition in which she was immersed. Showalter further argues that women writers, due to their vulnerability to the established values and aesthetics of the male tradition, often seek male approval, which can lead to internal conflicts and self-erasure. She points to the dynamic between two artists in marriage as particularly complex. In such relationships, the woman's artistic identity and ambitions can be subsumed by her partner's, leading to an emotional and intellectual struggle. Barrett Browning's letters from the 1850s to her friend Mrs. David Ogilvy provide poignant evidence of this conflict. In one such letter from 1854 she writes, "I am behindhand with my poem. Robert swears he shall have his book ready in spite of everything for print, when we shall be in London for the purpose, but as for mine, it must wait for the next spring I begin to see clearly. Also it may be better not to bring out the two works together. If mine were ready, I might not say so perhaps." This letter reflects the familiar struggle between Barrett Browning's ambition for her own work and her deep emotional investment in Robert Browning's success. Her statements suggest a form of self-erasure, as her own literary aspirations are deferred in favor of her husband's. Such internal conflict, Showalter argues, is emblematic of the broader issues faced by women in male-dominated literary and artistic fields, where their work often becomes secondary to that of their male counterparts. By examining these dynamics, Showalter stresses the importance of fully understanding the framework of the female subculture in order to grasp the themes and structures of women's literature. Without this understanding, scholars risk misinterpreting or oversimplifying the experiences of women writers. Moreover, Showalter warns that overlooking these nuances may hinder the ability to recognize the significance of women's contributions to literary traditions, impeding a fuller and more inclusive reading of literary history. In her essay Cassandra, Florence Nightingale reflects poignantly on the painful yet essential process of feminist awakening, describing it as a critical force that drives progress and guarantees free will. Nightingale criticizes the complacency of middle-class Victorian women, urging them to embrace suffering rather than indifference. She asserts that it is better to experience pain than to be paralyzed by apathy, claiming that suffering may serve as a transformative force, one capable of leading to change and progress. Her metaphor of drowning in the breakers illustrates this notion. Although many may struggle and fail, it only takes one person to discover a new world. Nightingale's passage highlights her belief in the redemptive and forward-moving power of suffering, suggesting that discomfort is integral to the feminist cause. "Give us back our suffering," we cry to heaven in our hearts. Suffering rather than indifferentism, for out of suffering may come the cure. Better to have pain than paralysis. 100 struggle and drown in the breakers, one discovers a new world. Nightingale, page 398. This awakening from the comfortable sleep of Victorian womanhood, Nightingale asserts, is painful by its very nature. This theme is evident in the works of key female authors, such as George Eliot, Edith Wharton, Kate Chopin, and Olive Schreiner. In these works, women are depicted as waking up to a world that severely restricts their aspirations, often leading to their demise or a tragic fate, rather than empowerment or liberation. Female suffering becomes a commodity consumed by both male and female readers alike. Novels like The Mill on the Floss, The Story of an African Farm, and The House of Mirth achieve narrative fulfillment when a male mourner visits the grave of the female heroine, highlighting the limited agency and inevitable tragedy experienced by women in Victorian literature. Even in contemporary works by English women, themes of misery and unhappiness continue to dominate. In And They All Lived Unhappily Ever After, 1974, Dame Rebecca West observes this enduring theme in modern female literature. Notable examples of this trend include Fay Weldon's Down Among the Women and Female Friends, where suicide by the heroine is depicted almost as a domestic accomplishment. In Muriel Sparks' The Driver's Seat, the protagonist Lise embarks on a desperate quest to find a woman-hating psychopath to murder her. Lisa's meticulous actions, selecting the dress she wants to be killed in, pursuing her assassin, and even handing him the knife, offer a profound commentary on women's self-assertion. Spark raises the unsettling question of whether a woman's only means of self-definition is to choose her destroyer, forcing us to reconsider who holds power in such circumstances. These self-destructive narratives cannot merely be dismissed as expressions of neurotic personal pathology. As Annette Kolodny suggests, we must recognize that these worlds, while seemingly odd or unusual, may reflect deeper truths. For many women, these are the only worlds available, and their seemingly irrational responses may in fact be justifiable, or even necessary. Elaine Showalter argues for the need for women's literature to transcend the traditional focus on themes of death, suffering, madness, and compromise. However, she acknowledges that suffering, especially early suffering, is often essential for discovering new possibilities. Some recent works by women, such as those by Adrienne Rich, have begun to contextualize transformational pain within history. Rich's Of Woman Born, Motherhood as Experience and Institution, challenges the patriarchal rejection and alienation of mothers by their daughters, thus offering a broader, more inclusive understanding of motherhood and female identity. Historically, literature depicted a deep fear of becoming one's own mother, a condition known as matrophobia, with hatred toward one's mother often seen as a form of feminist enlightenment. However, 1970s literature by women began to move beyond this concept, as evidenced in works like Surfacing by Margaret Atwood and Kimflix by Lisa Arthur. Just as the death of a father was a significant event in a male protagonist's life, the death of a mother is now treated with equal gravity in female literature, marking a shift toward a more nuanced exploration of female identity and generational relationships. The study of these changes, of awakenings, transformations, and the development of new mythologies within female culture, is central to gynocriticism. Understanding how women's literature has evolved to encompass broader and more complex female experiences is vital to the ongoing development of feminist literary criticism. A fundamental tenet of feminist literary theory posits that women's experiences should find expression through distinctive genres and forms of art. This notion is rooted in the belief that women's unique perspectives, shaped by gendered experiences, necessitate their own literary channels for articulation. In the Victorian period, critics like G.H. Lewes, Richard Hutton, and Richard Simpson frequently discussed the educational, experimental, and biological handicaps that women novelists faced, which they saw as limitations on the meaning and potential future of women's literature. These concerns were not merely external but were echoed by women themselves, who often recognized these constraints in the social and literary spheres. Fanny Fern, a pioneering American novelist, suggested that women were permitted to write novels primarily as a means to channel their frustrations and desires in a socially acceptable manner. Fern believed that these works allowed women to express their deepest thoughts and fantasies in ways that might otherwise threaten the established norms of family, church, and state. She envisioned a scenario in which a woman's writing, discovered by her family after her death, would reveal how little her husbands or fathers truly knew of her inner life. Despite Fern's bold and provocative writing style, her work was often imbued with the desire to provoke masculine reactions, reflecting the complex dynamics of female authorship within a male-dominated literary culture. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, organizations like the Women Writers' Suffrage League began to scrutinize the mental and professional constraints imposed upon women writers by the male-dominated publishing industry. Elizabeth Robbins, a novelist and actress who served as the first president of the League, argued that no female writer had fully been able to explore female consciousness without the stifling influence of societal and professional boundaries. In her work Woman's Secret, Robbins writes, "The realization that she had access to a rich and as yet unrifled storehouse may have crossed her mind, but there were cogent reasons for concealing her knowledge. With that wariness of ages which has come to be instinct, she contented herself with echoing the old fables, presenting to a man-governed world puppets as nearly as possible, like those that had from the beginning found such favor in men's sight. Contrary to the popular impression, to say in print what she thinks is the last thing the woman novelist or journalist is so rash as to attempt. There, even more than elsewhere, unless she is reckless, she must wear the aspect that shall have the best chance of pleasing her brothers. Her publishers are not women." Robbins' Woman's Secret. This critique underscores the mental constraints women writers faced in expressing their true consciousness. According to Robbins, the prevailing social and literary systems dictated that women could not fully articulate their experiences without falling within the expectations of a male-dominated world. The publishing industry, which was controlled by male publishers, demanded that women writers adhere to the narratives and themes that appealed to male sensibilities, often subverting the potential for a distinct female literary voice. In response to the dominance of male publishers, many women began establishing their own independent publishing houses. Emily Faithfull's Victory Press, founded in the 1870s, was one of the first such initiatives. The Women Writers' Suffrage League advocated for a shift in the literary landscape. Once male dominance in publishing was overthrown, the previously suppressed female psyche would find its own unique literary expression. Writers such as George Eliot and Virginia Woolf were particularly vocal in their belief that literature produced by women could offer a precious speciality, a distinct and invaluable vision, that could not be fully realized under the constraints of male-dominated publishing and critical systems. Virginia Woolf, in particular, believed that women's literature held the promise of offering a new perspective on the world, one that was informed by the specific experiences of women. She argued that women, in writing about their own lives and perspectives, could offer insights and modes of expression that were entirely different from those of male authors. The precious speciality of women's literature, as Woolf described it, signified not just a divergence from male norms, but an entirely new form of storytelling that had the potential to reshape both literature and society. Feminine, feminist, female. In her seminal work A Literature of Their Own, Elaine Showalter categorizes the development of feminist literary criticism into three distinct phases: feminine, feminist, and female. These phases represent different approaches to understanding women's literature and the evolving role of gender in literary studies. Each stage signifies a shift in feminist literary theory, reflecting the changing social, political, and cultural contexts in which women's literature has been created and critiqued. The feminine phase. The feminine phase of feminist literary criticism spanned roughly from 1840 to 1880. During this period, women writers largely sought to compete with male authors, internalizing male perceptions of female nature and adopting conventional literary tropes. They often wrote to demonstrate their intellectual parity with men, engaging in a form of self-imposed mimicry. One of the defining characteristics of this phase was the widespread use of male pseudonyms by female writers, such as George Eliot, Mary Ann Evans, Currer Bell, Charlotte Brontë, Acton Bell, Anne Brontë, and Ellis Bell, Emily Brontë. These pseudonyms were not merely literary tools, they were reflections of the women's awareness of the social and professional limitations they faced as female authors in a male-dominated literary world. The adoption of a male name often altered the tone, style, and structure of their writing, allowing women to navigate the literary market more successfully. In contrast to their English counterparts, American women authors frequently chose extremely feminine pen names, such as Fanny Fern, Fanny Forrester, and Grace Greenwood. These pen names concealed the formidable talents and professional ambitions of these women. In some cases, female authors adopted male pseudonyms to convey more conventional or domestic messages. Harriet Parr, a Victorian novelist, used the pen name Home Lee to mask her professional identity and to emphasize the more traditionally feminine themes in her work. The literature produced in this phase was often nuanced, subversive, and occasionally ironic, requiring readers to read between the lines to understand the hidden meanings and possibilities within the text. The feminist phase. The feminist phase, which spanned from 1880 to 1920, marked a decisive break from the passive imitation of male literary norms. In this phase, female authors used literature as a tool for activism, highlighting and protesting the systemic injustices and inequalities faced by women. Novelists such as Elizabeth Gaskell and Frances Trollope dramatized the struggles of women through their exploration of class, factory life, and the exploitation of women in industrial society. This phase was characterized by a sense of political urgency, with women writers reimagining the role of female artists in the cultural landscape. A distinctive feature of feminist writing in this period was the emergence of Amazon utopias, futuristic visions of societies led by women, which rejected male-dominated laws, medicine, and government. These utopian narratives explicitly challenged the patriarchal structures of their time. One of the most notable authors of this genre was Charlotte Perkins Gilman, whose feminist critique in The Man-Made World, or Our Androcentric Culture, proposed an alternative society where women, rather than men, held positions of authority and influence. In this work, Gilman uses the metaphor of a beehive to depict sisterhood, envisioning a world where women are united by social service, loyalty, and the collective care of their communities. The feminist phase can be seen as a form of feminist socialist realism, in which female authors assertively addressed social and political issues. While this period was defined by its focus on women's suffering and oppression, it also sought to expand the literary canon by breaking free from traditional themes and didacticism. Women writers of this era rejected the notion that their work should be confined solely to motherhood or domesticity, asserting their right to explore a broader range of themes, from politics to personal identity. The female phase. The female phase of feminist literary criticism, beginning in the 1920s, represents a departure from both the imitation of male literature and the overt protest against patriarchal norms. In this phase, female authors sought to create a body of work that was independent of male influence, and that centered the female experience as the source of artistic creation. This phase is characterized by a reimagining of literary forms and techniques, as women writers explored new ways of representing female consciousness and experience. Prominent figures of the female phase include Virginia Woolf and Dorothy Richardson, both of whom questioned the gendered nature of language and narrative. Woolf, in particular, introduced the concept of male and female sentences, suggesting that women's writing should reflect the distinctiveness of their gendered experience. These writers also explored the ways in which female experiences, both internal and external, could be sexualized and redefined. Their works contributed to the development of a new literary language that challenged traditional gender norms and expanded the scope of what literature could represent. Showalter's contribution. Elaine Showalter argues that each of these three phases, feminine, feminist, and female, hold significance in the development of feminist literary criticism. She stresses the importance of historical awareness when approaching these phases, advocating for the reconstruction of women's literary history. Showalter suggests that there is a vast body of literature, novels, poems, and plays, by women that has long been neglected or ignored. By creating a continuous female tradition, spanning decades rather than focusing on individual great women, feminist critics can uncover patterns of influence and response across generations. This approach challenges the traditional periodicity of literary history and its canon of achievement, opening up new avenues for the study of female literature. Showalter also emphasizes the need to move beyond the canonical works of Austen, the Bronte sisters, and Eliot, advocating for the discovery of a broader range of women's works. By examining these ignored or forgotten texts, feminist critics can trace the evolution of a female literary tradition and explore the developmental phases of women's writing, much like any other subcultural art form. I just want to take a moment to say a big thank you for watching, supporting, and encouraging this vlog. It really means a lot to have such an amazing audience who shares the same curiosity and passion for these topics.